And of course, tonight, as we mentioned earlier, the BBI constitutional amendments push formally has its opposite as the Linda Katiba lobby group rolls out its no campaign. Linda Katiba has declared that BBI amendments amount to the mutilation of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, a document they say is simply too precious to be subjected to an ambiguous process that they argue the BBI is. Proponents of the BBI reforms, meanwhile, are marching on with a push that they say will improve on the gains of the 2010 Constitution. So positions have been made clear. It seems it will be BBI versus Linda Katiba. But is this finally the beginning of a debate over real substance than just politics? Joining me for that is BBI's committee of experts, Professor Ben Sihanya, still here with us in studio. And remotely is Linda Katiba's Daisy Amdanich. Both of you, thank you for being patient. Prof, actually, I think, Daisy, you were to respond before we got into the day's other stories. I can give you a minute to respond to that because we do want to finish with the requests of the MCAs and actually get into the substantive issues of the BBI and why Linda Katiba believes that we should protect the 2010 Katiba. Daisy.
Yes, what I was saying is that we have the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, and that commission has been set up precisely to do exactly what they are purporting to be conferring to the MCAs by way of inducing them to support the BBI. And Wahiga, it is important for Kenyans to remember why we had where the Constitution of Kenya 2010 brought about the different commissions that would offer us checks and balances and separations of power so that we do not have leaders and a president who thinks that the public purse is there to be used for personal benefit or to confer personal benefits to leaders. The Salaries and Remuneration Commission is there to determine the salaries of state and public officers and the benefits that are due to them. With regards to the car grants and this so-called harmonizing, the giving of car grants to members of parliament is actually not right because members of parliament are there as representatives of the people and they're there to serve the people. So we do not want to continue exacerbating a problem that we already had in the first place that has given people who come into positions of leadership and authority a sense of entitlement over the public purse. We've seen Parliament have a habit of raiding the public purse for personal benefit. That is not right. And as I said earlier on, that this parasitic leadership, the parasitic political and civil service that think that the public purse is there to keep them in the lap of luxury as opposed to remunerate them for administering the state on behalf of the people is the problem that the Constitution 2010 has sought to address. And so these people, so when you look at now, they're telling us that the BBI is going to enhance and make things better, and they're taking us back to a time pre-2010 where we had a leadership class that was not accountable to the people and that essentially abused public office and the public purse for personal gain. That is problematic.
Daisy, let's get deep now into the BBI. Obviously, we've had adequate time to respond to what the MCAs asked for today. But because both of you are enthusiasts of the law and lovers of the Constitution, and Prof, I want to start with you on this one, proponents have talked of a constitutional moment. What is this constitutional moment for the BBI, Prof?
Wahiga, the constitutional moment is here with us. It was there in 2010. It is here. Why? Because we have realized, Kenyans have realized that there are some fundamental problems that need to be addressed. And that has been discovered from about 2013. We had elections, we had a crisis under the 2010 Constitution. I don't know where Linda Katiba was when there were problems with the elections in 2013. Where were they? We had problems with the elections in 2017, and therefore every 5 years we have had violence and we have had deaths associated with elections. Where were they? There have been other fundamental problems with the economy, with corruption. Where has Linda Katiba been? Or they don't know that there have been problems. If that Constitution of 2010 has been that good, that perfect, why do we have these problems of a debt crisis, of corruption, of exclusion, the 9 points that were identified by the President Kenyatta and Honorable Raila Odinga, and which were endorsed by the people in the first 2019 BBI report, which was consultative. Where were they to give their views? They sat the other side giving a little...
We actually gave our
Just a second. No? I think I gave you time to speak. When I'm speaking, keep quiet, please. This is not about haranguing and rhetoric.
Prof, she has given you space. Continue, please.
Please. This is not a haranguing match. So where were they when submissions were being made to the issue of BBI 1, which Kenyans gave, and they said the following 9 problems afflict us. 2020, Kenyans said, now implement this, and there was a validation exercise held throughout the country. Where were they? Crybabies watching out there to criticize. In Kenya, it's not good enough to criticize.
Is it fair to call them crybabies?
Absolutely.
Prof? Having a differing opinion doesn't make one a crybaby.
You are a crybaby
it's the nature of democracy.
You are a crybaby if, for instance, you keep talking about symptoms, you keep pointing fingers, you don't give solutions. We have governance problems. We don't but they focus on symptoms. The issues that they are talking about, the issues of health, issues of water, those are symptoms of a governance crisis. And you resolve governance crisis through a 4-pronged BBI approach. 1, constitutional reforms. 2, legislative reforms. 3, administrative reforms. 4, policy reforms. And the main one is constitutional reforms, because there are fundamental problems that you cannot resolve administratively. So you are a crybaby if you don't follow what Mao Zedong said. Mao Zedong said, no research, no citation of authority, no giving of proper evidence that are coherent, no right to speak.
Daisy, you can respond now. Go ahead, please.
Okay, first of all, I think it's a very curious thing that the BBI proponents talk about fighting corruption, and in the same breath are using corrupt means to try and induce members of county assembly to pass this BBI that they consider to be groundbreaking. There is no constitutional moment in Kenya. In fact, the crisis that is facing us is a leadership and a governance crisis. The problem that we have in Kenya is that the political class tend to prey on Kenyans who do not remember their history well. All these issues that Professor Shihanya is talking about, telling us that there was violence in 2013 and 2017. This violence does not create itself. In fact, it is the leadership that are the instigators of violence. And it is not because that we don't have laws. It is because our leaders refuse to be bound by the law and constitutionalism. People go to the leadership engages in violent political engagement, and Professor Shihanya may as well also tell us how BBI would resolve the kind of violent engagement we saw in Kisii yesterday, that we've seen in Githurai, where political opponents have gangs that fight against each other in a bid to show who is more supreme than the other. The problems that we have are because we have political parties and political leaders that refuse to obey the law. And this is what the Constitution 2010 sought to address. If you look at what BBI is proposing right now, and it is important that we remember where we came from, the BBI is proposing, yes, administrative, legislative, and constitutional amendments, as well as policy amendments. But the most fundamental of them are the constitutional amendments. And what those constitutional amendments are going to do, or are seeking to do, should Kenyans not rise up and Linda Katiba and defend the Constitution 2010 and reject BBI, is that we will usher in a pre-1991 kind of leadership, where the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary are merged. In fact, the way things are, when you look at the way the president is operating right now, where parliament is essentially in the grip and at the whims of the executive, where it is really a marionette for the executive, and the president disobeys judiciary, frustrates the judiciary. We know he has failed to appoint the 41 judges, despite the fact that the law requires him to do so, that court orders have been given. So essentially what BBI is seeking to do is to make constitutional the actions that we have seen of the president. So they want to take us back to a situation where the members of parliament are also members of the executive. They are not vetted. There is no accountability. They are answerable to the president. The judiciary is under the control of the president through the proposed judiciary ombudsman that will then be used to intimidate judges and interfere with the judicial process. That will ensure that the people who sit in parliament do so at the pleasure of the president and at the whim of the president and answer to him. Those are the proposals in the BBI, okay? And that is why they are not allowing people to read it. If this document is so good and they are proposing all these rafts of amendments to the Constitution, why haven't they made it available to everybody? We recall in 2005 when we had the WACO draft, it was made available to everybody. Kenyans were able to read it. Civic education was carried out in a huge way. Same thing with 2010. However, the BBI is a moving target. We don't know what is in the BBI. The one that was unveiled in Bomas was different from the one in KICC. We don't know what is going to the counties. So, for me, all these things that they are talking about, Waihiga, and Kenyans need to understand, the things that they want to do. This Constitution 2010 was imposed on the leadership by the citizens. And since the first government under the 2010 Constitution came in, which is the Jubilee administration headed by President Uhuru Kenyatta, he has carried out a systematic assault and dismantled the constitutions, weakened the independent commissions, and now they want to constitutionalize it through constitution amendments in the BBI.
Daisy, let me get a response now from Prof. Sihanya. And Prof, even as you respond to what she said, talk to us about electoral violence. And this is a question that keeps coming up in this discussion. How will the BBI sort that issue that we saw in 2013? You described it accurately. In 2017, will the addition of positions at the end of that election actually sort the grievances that many had in 2013 and 2017, Prof?
Thank you. Before I go to the question of addressing electoral violence, which is one of the greatest challenges of post-independent Kenya, let me just address why we have a conservative movement in a little more detail. Four-pronged. One, the Linda Katiba group have not told Kenyans how, for instance, you can resolve the woman question, the question of representation of women, 2/3 written in the 2010 Constitution, not implementable as of now, not implementable. 5 bills in the National Assembly failed. The advisory by the CJ, if you are to dissolve parliament today, you go to elections, you are not going to get those numbers of women. So you must amend the Constitution, and that's what BBI proposes at Articles 97. I wish the Linda Katiba group could be citing clauses and arguing with facts and evidence. A lot, they list issues, claims without evidence and without clear analysis. 2, how are you going to promote devolution if you don't increase it from 15% to 35%? Can they debate that issue? I have seen what they are saying, that, well, that should depend on political goodwill. Political goodwill has not gotten us beyond 15%. Where will it come from? We want it to be constitutionally mandated, constitutionally guaranteed, so that you can go to court and litigate that this is a minimum, not that it will depend on the goodwill of the executive or the sitting president. It must be mandated. And the consumer so far has helped us when it is consumer mandated. What development fund, which is a major winner, whereby it has been discovered and BBI says, let us have World Development Fund, because we know that the iniquities at national level in terms of regional development since independence has been replicated in our counties, whereby the governor will support only wards that they know have supported them or will support them. So World Development Fund is a major winner. How have they propose to resolve these disparities in the wards? Zero. The issue of shared prosperity, which is a major addition to the constitutional discourse in this country, at the proposed Article 11A, it is saying that it's not good enough to say we want to share the cake. It's about baking the cake, greater productivity in Kenya, and then we share the productivity where the economy, questions of economic development, industrialization, was assumed since independence that we will always grow and that our problem would be sharing. But as of now, serious political economists have told us that even if we were to share whatever is available, we would be worse off. So we must grow the economy. This is proposed Article 11A. Let them debate that. Let them engage with evidence, constitutional sociology, political economy, not rhetoric.
Okay.
Lastly, for me, is this whole question of impunity has been there in this country. Disrespect of court processes. Non-appointment of judges. BBI is saying that once the Judicial Service Commission has made its recommendation, within a reasonable period, say 21 days, if the president doesn't make the appointment, they will be deemed to have been appointed. That's an issue, another issue of dealing with the problem of the executive versus the judiciary. What is their proposal? None, zero.
Okay.
So the issue of electoral violence, Wahiga Moro.
Yes, how did you finish with that, sir?
That has been a major problem which dates back to 1969, the Kisumu massacre. It goes to the 1992, 97, 07, 2013. We have lost lives, 2017, Baby Pendo, etc., etc. This did not have to happen. But BBI is now saying we need to broaden. We need to have electoral justice, electoral equity. Electoral systems must be fair.
Where does BBI say that specifically? Because we know, talk to us about that. How will those electoral systems be fair so that everyone believes the process was carried out in a transparent manner? Where does BBI specify that? And I do have, I've looked at the Constitutional Amendment Bill quite a bit. Talk to us about that, Prof.
Let me deal with at least three. Number one, a clear provision and clarification of Article 81 on the questions of equality of the vote. So that, and as two, the question of we will expand what we would call the winner takes all is so that we have inclusivity rather than a winner takes all. So that as of now, most of the electoral violence has been related to presidential elections.
That is correct.
That's actually that's the main problem.
And the concern that votes were either not counted, votes were diverted. Again, help me understand how that is taken away, if we pass the BBI.
Clarify that on the principle of the case of Maina Kia, which some of we argued up to the Supreme Court, that the votes are counted at the polling station and the polling station decision is final and can only be set and settled or removed through a court order. Those are some of the issues that we are talking about. You talk about winner doesn't take it all, you have inclusivity. People have been fighting because the president has been everything in this country. You then say that we will have the president and we have what you call a restructured executive legislative power structure. Not expanded, but restructured.
The words of the BBI are expanded, but we can talk about that later. Prof, you have anything to say before I allow Daisy to respond?
So you have a situation also where you have a leader of the opposition who, again, in the past, if you are a leader, or if you don't win the presidency, you become irrelevant for the next 5 years. Now you will have a leader of the opposition who will also keep rallying the troops towards the next election.
Okay, Prof, hang on there. Let's get a response from Daisy first.
I'm sorry. And lastly, of course,
briefly, please.
The idea that the distribution of seats, the distribution of the nominated MPs will be, or party list, will be dependent not on the seats that a party wins, but on the basis of the votes that a party wins. So that, because in some cases a party can be coming second, losing by just one vote, they will, as of now, under 2010, they cannot nominate anybody.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
But under the BBI, they will be able to nominate.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Daisy, come in first. Let's begin by talking about that two-third gender rule. and the question Prof asked you at the very beginning.
Okay, first of all, let me say that the BBI does not answer the two-thirds gender principle. And the two-thirds gender principle has not failed because the Constitution has failed. The two-thirds gender principle has failed because of a lack of political will. And I will demonstrate this by giving the example of the presidency, where the president has to appoint a cabinet or ambassadors or the parastatals, so from the diplomatic corps and everything, where no legislation is needed. It is a matter of numbers because the two-thirds gender rule is for all appointive and elective offices. The president has failed to meet the two-thirds gender rule in cabinet, has failed to do so in civil service, in his diplomatic corps appointments and his parastatal appointments. The BBI does not propose any kind of mechanism to implement that. What they are talking about, the BBI responding or answering the two-thirds gender principle, is what they have simply lifted from the county assemblies, Article 177B, which actually provides for a mechanism to implement the two-thirds gender rule. And now they are moving it to the National Assembly, but they vary it because the BBI actually takes away the seats that are there for women, 47 seats, and moves them to the Senate, and then has framed it in such a way as to suggest that the numbers that they will top up is not just for the National Assembly, but for the whole of Parliament. So it's actually a play on words. Furthermore, Parliament has been expanded to include, under the BBI, has been expanded to include members of parliament as cabinet ministers and deputy cabinet ministers or assistant ministers. And that is where they have removed the women, because they removed those 47 women. They put the two-thirds. There is no guarantee that the additional 70 seats that they are proposing to bring in will be given any kind of affirmative action to meet that, and then they do a top-up. The same top-up that they had been resisting all along, because the formula that was in the county assemblies that they are now lifting for the National Assembly has been the proposal of the Duale bill. So the fact that they can put it in the BBI and tell us that this is the answer is a demonstration that actually all along it was a refusal of the political class to implement the two-thirds gender rule. So the BBI does not answer the two-thirds gender rule, and in fact, if there is anybody who is going to lose out more than anybody from the BBI, it is women, having been shortchanged. And women would be foolish to actually accede to being hoodwinked a third time by the same political class that exercised veto power over rights guaranteed by their constitution. Professor Shihanya knows that the rights of women are not given to us by the political class. They are enshrined in the constitution. And what the political class, led by the president himself, have done is they have exercised veto power over women's rights as enshrined in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Article 27.
Daisy, there's a question
about devolution and the 15%.
Go ahead, Daisy.
They talk about devolution and the 35% going to the counties. There's nothing that stops, even as currently framed, there is nothing that stops the counties from getting more than the 15%. In fact, the challenge has been the frustration that the national executive has been subjecting the county governments to. The national government behaves as though the devolved funds, the monies that go to devolution, is an act of benevolence on the part of the national executive and the treasury, so that they are constantly frustrating. They have not fully unbundled the functions that are due to the county, neither have they funded them. So our counties have been frustrated. So by telling us that they are going to devolve 35% when they have frustrated even the 15% minimum, and remember that the Constitution says that it is a minimum, it is not a maximum. So nothing stops them from deciding that it can be more than 15%. Concerning the Ward Development Fund, the MCAs are being hoodwinked into believing that they are being given something special. Remember that one of the principles of devolution is self-determination. County governments and the legislative assemblies at the county level have powers and privileges that allow them to legislate to have ward development funds. If you recall how the CDF fund came into being, a member of parliament, Mwangi, I think it was Mwangi Karue, is the one who actually proposed legislation that then provided for CDF. There is absolutely nothing that stops county assemblies right now as we speak, the members of county assemblies, from legislating in their county assemblies under the principles of fair and equitable distribution of resources that come to the county, to actually legislate at the county level for a ward development fund. And in fact, I believe there are some county assemblies that have actually provided for ward development funds. Waihiga,
I want to ask you a question. Let me interrupt you.
Point by point.
Let me interrupt you. I want to ask you a question. A lot of what you've said about the last 10 years of the implementation of this constitution has to do with goodwill of the leadership of the country. If over the next 20, 30, 40 years we get leaders who don't showcase the goodwill that you're talking about, is there a way that the BBI could help lock some of those things so that no matter who is in power in the future, you don't have to rely on that goodwill? How do you respond to those who feel that you are throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
Now, let me say this, Waihiga. Constitutions are living documents, and they can be amended, and in fact, the Constitution provides for their amendments, okay? But there is very little that you can do when you have a leadership class that refuses to be fettered within the law, like the current government that we have.
And I am asking you...
In fact,
and that's why I'm asking you, what happens if...
There's nothing you can do.
If 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we still...
You see,
Go ahead.
You see, eternal vigilance is the price that we pay for the democratic space that we have, okay? We have to continually give pushback, and we have. Let me give you, for example, the 2/3 gender principle. The parliament refused to implement the necessary legislation. The president refused to appoint according to the 2/3 gender rule. We as citizens went to court. We got court orders. The courts have found President Uhuru Kenyatta in contravention of the rule of law and the Constitution with regards to the composition of cabinet. Now, the president has ignored those court orders. What can we do? The other thing is that the parliament, we even have a dissolution order right now, a dissolution order for parliament for failure to implement the law. And all this is provided for in the Constitution. What is BBI going to change? How is BBI going to enforce the law where the leaders don't? Because we have a case where they have refused to abide by the Public Finance Administration, Public Finance Management Act. They've refused to abide by the Constitution. They've refused to abide by court orders.
Let me get a response.
Actually, what BBI is doing, what BBI is proposing to do, Waihiga, and it is important, and I really need to say this. What BBI is proposing to do is to constitutionalize the unconstitutionality that we have been seeing.
Okay.
They want to give back excessive powers to the presidency, put the executive and the judiciary under the command of the presidency, which is what Kenyans said they did not want, which is why the Constitution 2010 divided the powers of the presidency, separation of powers, making
Daisy, I'm going to have to stop you there.
From the legislature, from the judiciary.
Thank you, Daisy. I think you've made your point. You've asked an important question that I want to get a response from Prof. You've asked, how will BBI ensure that these laws, whatever laws are passed, should the BBI be made into law, are enforced if political classes, depending on, you could decide not to have the goodwill. And we've spoken quite a bit about goodwill in this interview, Prof. What happens if whoever is in leadership to implement the BBI doesn't have the goodwill, doesn't see the need to? Could we be back here another 5 years from now for another BBI 2.0, for example? BBI 2.0, for example, Prof.
So I think she's really spoken quite a lot about 5 points, which I'll be brief about. Number one, the Linda Katiba, through their rhetoric, propaganda, and rumor, without any reference to any clause in BBI or the Constitution, are saying that the woman question is not be resolved by BBI. Please, Linda Katiba, read clause 13 of the BBI, which seeks to amend Article 97 of the Constitution, and I'll only read one. It says that in CA, there shall be such top-up number of special seats members necessary to ensure that no more than 2/3 of the membership of parliament are of the same gender. It can't be clearer. Please refer us to documents. Rhetoric, rumor, propaganda, it will not help this country. Read sites. I'm talking about you must get.
Now, Professor,
just a second. I kept quiet when you were.
Let him make his point, but not
site.
Wahiga.
Okay.
Site.
Wahiga.
Okay.
I was quiet when you were spreading rumors. I was quiet when you were spreading rumors and propaganda.
Okay. Thank you, Daisy.
Prof, no, it is not rumors and it is not propaganda. And Wahiga, you cannot allow him to make his point by trying to discredit and to demean our campaign. Okay. Let him make his point.
Okay. Let us, Prof. Go ahead.
Let us cite clause and verse as we argue, not marketplace altercations. Number 2, you are talking. They are talking about the question of governance depending on goodwill. That is very strange to me as a constitutional lawyer. I've taught that subject for 28 years and I practice it. You cannot premise governance of a country on goodwill of leaders. That's why we have constitutions, we have legislation, we have policy, we have administrative processes, so that they are mandated and they are required to do things. If they don't, then you amend the constitution to tie them. You don't keep saying goodwill, goodwill, and there is no solution that they're giving on how to solve the lack of goodwill. Number 3, there is the question of, surely you don't need a constitutional amendment on 35%. You don't need amendment on World Development Fund. The legislation at county level can do it. Why hasn't it been done? When will Linda Katiba help do it? That's why it's to be put. In Kenya, we have learned the hard lesson that unless you put fundamentals, not everything, but fundamentals in the constitution, it shall not be done. That's a lesson of our history, unfortunate as it is.
We have put fundamentals in the 2010 constitution, Prof, that have not been done. What guarantee do you have that fundamentals in the BBI amendments will be implemented to the letter?
Thank you. That's my 4th point, which is basically about this, and it relates to the power balance in government, which again Linda Katiba is spreading the rumor that. Okay, fine.
You can give your point without saying that they are spreading a rumor, Prof.
Yeah, I'm not naming any individual. Linda Katiba is a movement, and I can talk about it because I've read their papers. I have it there. I've read everything that they've been saying. So there is a saying, for example, that there is no accountability, there is no, just implement 2010, don't amend anything, and when they you tell them, but 2010 itself, there have been problems of implementation. So we must go to the next step, which basically means this, at least 3 areas of enhancing that implementation. Number 1, build greater checks and balances especially in the executive legislative power structure, so that, for instance, you have a prime minister, deputy prime minister, and ministers in the House. It's not just executive, it's executive legislative power structure, so that they are more accountable through, on a day-to-day basis, a prime minister, a deputy prime minister that will be accountable on a day-to-day basis to the House and to the people of Kenya. You enhance accountability mechanisms. The issue of COB, controller of the budget, their role, the role of the Auditor General, you enhance that. You enhance the role of the DPP, Deputy Public Prosecutor, and even enhancing that, and those are in the BBI, from the level of a high court judge and higher authority to the level of a court of appeal judge. You enhance the role of the DCI. The DCI, so that the DCI becomes at the same level of the the 2 deputy IGs. So you enhance their role also to help in this enforcement. Lastly, on that issue of, I also talked about the issue of deemed, that if an official, if a state officer is expected to do something and they don't do it, there is now the question of it shall be deemed to have been done.
Okay.
And lastly, of course, the question of amend Article 80 of the Constitution under Chapter 6, Leadership and Integrity, to provide that prosecution, investigation, trials will be enhanced and expedited for greater accountability in Kenya.
Tell me this. You've talked about a prime minister, deputy prime ministers that are accountable to the House. Let's maybe narrow in on the prime minister. And we've shown a little bit of what the Constitutional Amendment Bill speaks to about that role. What is the primary purpose of that prime minister, Prof? In as few words as possible, for Kenyans watching across the land, some with legal degrees and others without, what would you say is the primary role of that prime minister?
Article 1, first let's talk about Kenya and let's talk about comparative constitutional law. Kenya is not an island. The office of the Prime Minister is being under Article 151A, B and C. 151. Briefly, this is an officer who has independent powers, independent of the president, not appointed on the basis of the seats that that party has in the House, and leader of that party, not at the behest. This is not, as the rumor mongers say, whoever they are, that this is just a super CS. This is not a super CS. This is a constitutionally mandated prime minister who comes from a certain party and whose party has a majority in the House.
But what many ask is, this is a person who has been appointed by the president, who is some are even saying, a glorified leader majority in a parliament where the agenda is that of the ruling party, where we assume the president will come from again. So, and that's the prime minister then keeps that parliament then accountable, Prof. Again, some say it's just they're basically doing the delegated will of the president. The powers delegated by the president are what the prime minister will have access to. How will this solve the power struggle that has been for such a long time, so that everybody actually wants to be president, Prof?
Thank you. I think that's where the mistake is, the misunderstanding is. I am referring to 151A, 151B, 151C. How does one become a prime minister? The president doesn't wake up and appoint Wahiga or Sihanya a prime minister. No.
Or Daisy.
Or Daisy for that matter. No. Are you elected, you are a member of parliament in the first instance? Do you belong to the majority party or coalition of parties in the House? Those are objective constitutional criteria, which is not at the behest of the president, not a super CS the way it is. Delegated power? No. The Constitution provides for those powers. Under Article 151A, and most of them are quite substantial. Oversee legislative agenda in the National Assembly, supervise execution of functions of the ministers in the House. Those are substantial. Independent of the president's will. It is given by the Constitution and the people. And of course, chair cabinet committee meetings. You are reducing presidential powers. In fact, the imperial president is dead. Long live the imperial president is dead. Long live constitutional democracy.
Okay.
And then
briefly,
Ms. Wahiga Mwaura, just two other explanations.
Briefly,
Kenya has had an experience with prime minister, and we have learned our lessons. We had Prime Minister Jomo Kenyatta at independence, coming through a similar process of leader of the majority in the House. And therefore, the clause was that the Queen, the head of state, the Queen, represented by the Governor General, Samako McDonald, would appoint the Prime Minister, but appoint only in nominal terms. It was dependent on who is controlling the House. Number two, we had Prime Minister Raila Odinga in the 2013 dispensation. Again, the clause in the National Accord and Reconciliation Act, and also the Constitution as amended in 2008, talked about a leader of the relevant in the House, the majority in the House. And therefore, even if you had a clause saying the president appoints, the president does not have absolute discretion to appoint this. The president is bound by these strictures. Lastly, Waigwa, is that, please, the prime minister is an office in all divided societies. Uganda has a prime minister, Tanzania has a prime minister, so many other countries have prime ministers.
And yet the seat of the presidency is still the desired one in those countries. I recently covered an election in Uganda, and I can tell you, Prof, all eyes were still on the presidency, even with the prime minister there. But that's
but there they don't have a constitutional stipulation on prime ministerial powers the way BBI is saying that it is constitutional. There it is discretion of the President Museveni.
Thank you, Prof. Daisy. Come in. I can give you a minute to respond to anything that Prof has said. Then I want us to talk a little bit about Linda Katiba. Some say you're a bit late off the mark. As you can see, BBI now is at the county assembly stage. A lot has happened, and I want to hear a little bit about what Kenyans can expect from Linda Katiba.
Wahiga, I think that it's important to say certain things. We already have seen, we've had an experience with the kind of proposal that is coming out of the BBI with regards to ministers coming from the parliament and answerable to the president, and this whole prime minister thing. We saw it in 1964, we saw it up to 2013, and despite the fact that we actually had a sitting prime minister at the promulgation of the constitution, Kenyans wanted to move away from that because we know that we saw the kind of corruption that we had with this over-bloated executive, that there were no checks and balances, there was no separation of powers, and Kenyans wanted a system that is separate and that can oversight the executive, not the executive oversighting itself in the name of having members of parliament. And by the way, the constitution, that BBI proposal actually says explicitly that members of parliament who will go into the executive will not be vetted. So their accountability is actually going to be to the president and not to the people. So this is a system of governance, a bloated government that Kenyans said they did not want. Okay? We know and we have seen this model of governance, and we are moving away from it. So in fact, because Kenyans are quick to forget their history, they are being hoodwinked into being made to believe that BBI is offering something new. BBI wants to take us back to where Kenyans said absolutely they do not want to go. Okay? And the Constitution, many of these amendments, they talk about dignifying the opposition so that we don't have winner take all. The system of elections that we have, the majoritarian system, is about winner take all. That's the system we have. So unless you actually fundamentally change our electoral system, you're not going to run away from winner take all.
Is that okay? That sounds like your proposal.
And if we're going to say that we want to bring up the winner take all, we want to deal with the winner take all system, then let's deal with it across the board. Because before long, we are going to have a situation where the executive at the county level will also demand dignifying of the opposition at that level. We're going to have, there are all instances at every level of governance where it is the winner who takes all. First past the post. That's our system of governance, Wahiga. First past the post equals the winner takes all. And it's not a foreign, system.
When you talk about
that
Daisy,
we've seen all over the world, even in America, who we've just witnessed having their election. Wahiga, I seem to have lost you. I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Okay, let's try it.
The system of elections in America, you lose, you go and you do your thing. This sense of entitlement of people wanting to be part of government at all times. For me, change the system, but don't try and bring us a mongrel in the name of accommodating losers when you don't want to change the system. Let's go for a pure PR system. That system that Ben Shihanya talked about, where you have numbers of votes, number of seats given to the party that wins the highest number of votes. So let's do that and let it be a national system.
Okay.
I seem to have... I don't know if you can hear me.
We will get back to Daisy as soon as we can sort out that connectivity issue. But Prof, Daisy has asked you a question. Why can't we have that system? And I think it's a system we've seen played out in South Africa. The party with the greatest number of votes, I guess the greatest number of seats in parliament, they will then, their nominee then becomes the president. And we've seen a situation where if their president steps down, the party then can nominate somebody else to be a president, as we saw in the case of, I believe it was Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa. And some say maybe that's the system that would sort out the tension pre-election, the tension on election, and of course the post-election fallout that then happens thereafter.
She has actually raised about 5 issues which I'll be quick at. Number one is that there's the issue of vetting, that there will be no vetting of the MP, of those who are going to the cabinet. This was debated quite a lot in BBI 1 and BBI 2 among Kenyans. And the idea here was that if the electoral process itself is the highest vetting process under Article 1 and Article 10 of the Constitution, people exercising their sovereignty through the electoral process, Article 1, Article 10, Article 38, among others. And I think in their faith in vetting, many Kenyans have asked. We know over CS who was vetted, and his highest qualification was a birth certificate. Can they help us understand how that vetting has worked in Kenya? So these are not just academic exercises for the marketplace.
But Prof, just because a vetting did not meet your standard doesn't mean that the concept of vetting is still not a valid one.
Waigo, I started by saying the voting process. The voting process is a process of vetting. But that's number one. Number two, of course, there are the roles of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the NIS, when they do their work professionally, they help in these processes. And I think all public servants are supposed to be subjected to these processes. That's a much better way of dealing with it than what we have had before. Number two was the question of, she commented that we have a bloated, that BBI is recommended a bloated government or a bloated executive. Nothing is further from the truth. If they read at all and quote Article 152, they'll see that Article 152 has not been changed. The cabinet will still be 14 to 22. I just want to request them to be reading and citing and quoting. That's number two. So it will still remain the same. Then there is the issue at number 4 about there is this rumor about PR. The proportional representation system which South Africa has used, and South Africa was in an important situation in 1994, 1996, that they were coming, this was the first time they were having elections. And it was easier to implement because this was the first time they are doing it. There are at least 3 major electoral systems. First past the post, which is quite discredited and has given us problems in Kenya. There is another one of proportional representation, the pure type in South Africa, which also works in certain environment. But Kenya has adopted through BBI MMPR. It is so simple that I think people who are interested in just talking don't read it. It is there, mixed member proportional representation. So in some seats you have first past the post. In others you have mixed member proportional representation. That's where the nominees are based, and the top-up is based on the votes that a party has won. Because Kenyans said, and I hope that Linda Katiba will be reading these materials. I know they didn't engage, but in this world, if you want to debate, you must engage from the word go. You don't ignore.
Okay.
Then we read this BBI materials
to knock at us. And we have read that BBI
I am
report,
quiet
and we have
when
done an analysis of it. So let him not say, no. What I am not going to allow you, Professor Sihanya, to do is to throw barbs at us. You make your point, you cite your clauses, and let me respond.
Thank you. You talked for 20 hours. I keep quiet. When I'm talking, please keep quiet. So when anybody reads these documents, they'll notice that Kenyans themselves said that they want to elect some, like they want to elect MCAs directly through a first past the post. But there are some seats which they want to be filled through other processes.
Okay.
Kenyans, lastly, changed their minds. Kenyans have the right to change their minds under Article 1, Article 10, and Article 38. While in the 2008-2013 dispensation, there was that issue of the Prime Minister and views were expressed 2008-2013. Kenyans eventually later on said in these documents, bring the Prime Minister back. So if you want to say the Prime Minister should be abolished, you go back to the people and nullify these documents. These are documents that came not just from the BBI Secretariat or the team of experts. I was a co-chair of the team of experts with Mr. Tom Macharia. We were relying on what scientifically, through a participatory process throughout the country, Kenyans had said, bring back the Prime Minister.
Prof, tell me this briefly, because I need to give Daisy ample time to respond, and we need to look at SMSs. We've gotten a lot of feedback on this. The cost of a referendum, the cost of the implementation of the proposals in the BBI. Today already, one got a hint that even the MCA's demands could be a cost, an overall cost. What will cost the country at a time when the country was already in a serious debt situation pre-COVID. COVID came in and depressed the global economy, Kenya notwithstanding as well. And one then wonders whether you are genuine, Prof, when you say that there will be no additional cost. Bearing in mind, the Office of the Prime Minister, even though on paper it might just, the holder of that office might just get another salary, he will have assistants. There will be departments created to support that office. There will be departments created to support the offices of the Deputy Prime Ministers as well. And all those will not just be at a national level, but for the engagements in the counties as well. Prof, it's hard to believe that there will be no extra cost to the taxpayer at a time like this in implementing the BBI.
Thank you. I think let's start with the referendum question, and then the consequences of the referendum would be that the BBI proposals, especially proposals, have passed, and therefore what then how do we deal with it? Three-pronged approach. First,
and briefly, please.
And briefly. The cost of a referendum can be, as has been said, 2 billion or less. Why do I say so? I know IBC says that, oh, the 2010 cost us this. But 2010, we were constructing a completely new register in the post-08 crisis. We were having so many changes, administrative and other changes. And I'm not suggesting that that cost was itself justified because of IEBC practices over time in terms of inflating costs.
Okay.
So that cost can be simple, can be a 2 billion issue. Number two is that serious political economists and social sociologists have told us that every electoral cycle we lose 2 years before and after the cycle. In terms of we are in a campaign mode, we have people who have died, we are in a tense environment, the economy is collapsing, we are losing, the GDP shrinks, etc., etc. And the cost is in the trillions.
Okay.
So what if you spend 2 billions to save 3 trillion or more, or 9 trillion that you are likely to lose because you don't have a working economy,
okay,
where there's a lot of capital flight, etc., etc. Lastly, the issues of COVID and debt. These are crises of governance, which can only be fixed by a governance solution, a four-pronged governance solution which BBI offers. Control amendment, legislative, administrative, policy amendments. Cost of Prime Minister's office, really, you will be having a Prime Minister who will now, for example, as of now, under 2010, you have, for example, the majority leader, and who sits in the House, and who has salary and allowances. But then the Prime Minister will be both in the executive and in the House. So the Prime Minister, as Prime Minister Odinga has said before, he was only earning a salary as MP. So you don't have two salaries.
Okay.
And you also make the government more efficient, because as we speak now, cabinet secretaries who are not in the house have had to suspend their executive functions to go when they are called to the house, and they spend money and they spend more time by going to the house.
Prof, I'll ask you to hold there so that I can give Daisy adequate time to respond. We also need to look at feedback. Daisy, let's talk about the cost of the BBI and the concern of many Kenyans that it will just add to the load that is already being experienced as we speak. And you can also respond to a few of the points that Prof raised. Go ahead, Daisy.
So let me say this, Wahiga. Other than the position of the leader of opposition that the BBI is proposing to put in place, where the person who loses at an election, can go and be official leader of opposition, there is nothing currently that stops the Prime Minister from coming from the same party as the presidency. Okay, because they have not changed the system of election. Yes, Kenya has always had a mixed member proportional representation system. That has not changed. It is fundamentally based on first past the post for elective offices, and BBI does not change that. So the likelihood of the person becoming president being the one to now appoint the prime minister from his party, his or her party, is very high, both the prime minister and the two deputy prime ministers. So they actually have not done anything about inclusion other than to just expand the executive and create more posts for people to be able to craft coalitions that can give them, better possibilities of clinching a seat. With regards to the cost of the BBI, the thing that we are saying here is this. BBI, a referendum, is not a priority. The state of the Kenyan economy as we speak is very dire. We are in a very serious economic recession that has been made worse than by COVID. Let us not deceive ourselves that COVID is the one that came and dented our economy. Our economy was already suffering a severe downturn and already experiencing the capital flight that Professor Sihanya is saying comes about as electoral, during the electioneering season. There has been serious capital flights. We have seen many international companies ditch Kenya because it is no longer profitable for people to do business in this country. The cost of doing business in Kenya is very high. Kenya is right now under IMF and World Bank conditionalities. The Cabinet Secretary for Treasury is actually mulling having to borrow 1 trillion shillings to bridge the deficit. This Jubilee administration has been running budgets with huge deficits and borrowing, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. We have spent money on non-priority projects. We are not dealing with socio-economic issues. Kenyans are hurting. So to sit and flippantly tell us that you want to throw some 2 billion shillings to a referendum and some 2 billion shillings to try and incentivize MCAs to pass it, and probably also incentivize members of parliament, or this facilitation they are calling for. This is people's money. The executive and the legislature have just increased Kenyans' taxes. Why should Kenyans have to pay taxes and not get any services? We don't have learning facilities for our children. Health facilities are under severe stress because of the health pandemic. The BBI is not addressing itself to productivity. In fact, what the BBI is about, it's about a consumptive leadership class. It is not telling us about prosperity. They are talking about shared prosperity, industrialization, and blah, blah, blah. They have departed from Vision 2030. It is not enshrined in there. Right now, this government is not following Vision 2030, which provides for industrialization. We have a social, political, and economic pillar that seeks to make Kenya an industrialized country by the year 2030. Right now, we're not meeting our targets. And so, instead of focusing on the issues that need to be addressed, how are we going to manage our debt? Where the estimates that KRA have given for revenue collection, they're estimating about 1.9 trillion shillings in revenue collection. The cabinet secretary for the treasury has given us a 3.2 trillion budget. So the government is running serious deficits, even in terms of just meeting its obligations, recurrent expenditure. You recall that civil servants were not paid in December. I do not even know if they have been paid yet. Parastatals and all these are facing closure. We have got the government is planning to cut 70,000 jobs. How is a referendum a priority? Unless the political class are threatening us with violence, unless we don't implement the the BBI, unless we don't pass the BBI.
Daisy.
And this is the thing that Kenyans need to ask themselves. Why is BBI a priority? I will tell you why. And this is the thing that we need to ask, because this is an issue that we must deal with. A president who is in his final term of office, facing 17 or so months before he leaves office, why is changing the constitution such a priority if indeed the BBI is not about succession politics? That is the question that we have to answer ourselves. It cannot be that President Uhuru Kenyatta has arisen and he has departed from being the symbol of national unity. He is mobilizing his ethnic base. He is telling them that I want to leave you in good hands and all. President Mwai Kibaki, when he supervised the promulgation of a new constitution, he allowed Kenyans he transitioned into his retirement. He did not interfere with our right to choose the next leadership. Yet here we are, we have a president who is now interfering with the succession of leadership, the leadership regeneration process that we have had, for which precedence has already been set. President Moi, at the repeal of Section 2A, brought in term limits, and we have seen those term limits respected. If BBI is indeed not about 2022 succession, then I will apologize. But I will tell you this. In my opinion, BBI is about succession politics.
Okay.
We have heard the president's people around him saying he's too young to retire. He will be in government even after he leaves and everything. And this is the pathway that they want to use to facilitate it.
Okay.
Because none of the proposals in BBI, other than the fundamental change of the executive and the expansion of it, and the all-encompassing presidency, every other administrative, legislative, and policy measure can be implemented without a referendum.
Thank you, Daisy.
And remember that the Constitution safeguards itself against those kind of amendments, because there are only 10 clauses that need a referendum, and those 10 are critical to leadership regeneration, independence of and checks and balances, and that's what they're going for.
Thank you, Daisy, and I trust you can still hear me. Prof, you'll have to hold on. Let's see what our viewers are saying. They also deserve a chance to weigh in on this conversation. This is what Kenyans are saying using the hashtag Newsnight on Twitter and on our SMS line 22422. Dungu Wainaina is asking basic questions to Professor Ben. Why have all devolved functions, exclusive, shared, etc., and their funds never been completed? Why is national government unconstitutionally holding them? Can proponents of BBI give its economic and financial implications impact? Okay, Prof, I hope you've noted that. Do we have another one? Okay, Honorable Onyango Ongoya wants to know who is funding Linda Katiba. We want to know the source of their funding. Okay, Daisy, please note that. Okay, a little chuckle there from Daisy. Frederick Okango, Daisy and Linda Katiba crew must know it's okay to protect successes of Constitution of Kenya, but it's more important to correct its failures by amendments and implementation. The two-thirds and fair representation principles can only be implemented by amendments, not activism. Okay, do we have a few more? Let's see, Kilonzo B says, yes, while it's time for changes, let MCS brave the hard times like fellow Wananchi are doing. It's not the time to ask for additional perks, okay? Responding to a discussion we had a bit earlier on. It's Kipleting says, we don't need more laws in our country. We lack political goodwill to implement the Constitution. Our counties are struggling with huge pending bills with 15% revenue share. Where will 35% come from? Implement current Constitution. All right, and I've seen so many, I don't know how many we'll take. Nation 87 says this constitution has to change, it's not working. Saying that we should continue implementing it is wrong. You have to present alternatives to this failed system. If not Punguza Mizigo, suggest something. If not BBI, suggest something. Yes. Don't push for the status quo. Okay, and we have one more. Okari the Great says, even if the law is amended, the people being entrusted with the role of making, implementing, and interpreting it must also be people of integrity, sound mind, and emotional intelligence. This remains to be seen amongst all the proponents of BBI. Okay. We have gone past our time, so please keep your responses short. Prof, let's start with you.
Mine are brief, and my colleague has had quite a lot of 100 hours per session. Prof. So just a second. Okay. 3 issues. And also to address the...
I think Dungu Wainaina asked some specific questions to you.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I'll address it. So 3 issues which have arisen in this debate, which are really important to clarify. The Constitution of Kenya 2010, under Chapter 16, Articles, to be precise, 255, 256, 257, provide for issues of amendment formula, parliamentary process, and the popular initiative ending with the referendum, etc., etc. Nowhere is it written that a sitting president or a president who is leaving office in 18 months cannot participate in constitutional amendment. So, and the court has also held that actually the government of the day can also participate in amendment. The question is, has the BBI process attained the relevant substantive and procedural thresholds in 255, 257, 256, 257. That's why I've been asking Linda Katiba to be courteous to Kenyans and cite authority, cite basis, not just making claims. Secondly, most of the Linda Katiba comments are lamentations in the wilderness about a failed governance structure, what they perceive to be a failed administration. BBI is a recognition of those failures and what to do about them. So if you have a problem with debt, BBI has not caused Kenya's debt. The 4-pronged approach, constitution, legislative, policy, admin, are to help solve the problems, the governance failures over the years, which has led Kenya to be one of the most heavily indebted countries. Those lamentations of IMF, World Bank, COVID, etc., the COVID crisis. COVID is partly natural health-related problem, but also a governance problem in terms of its management. So let us separate the issues of what are an actual and perceived failures of the administration from those that are related to proposed reforms. And that's where Linda Katiba is not clear. Okay. They conflate these issues. The last issue for me is that is the question of why go referendum, why go BBI when we have COVID, we have economic stagnation, and in fact recession, as some people call it. I wouldn't ask, why go to elections in 2022? Because will we have solved economic problems by 2022? Would Linda Katiba also say that, no, also stop elections? Many countries have gone through elections as we speak in the context of COVID, in the context of economic problems, because referendum and elections are instruments of governance to help reframe governance structures. The US has just gone through elections when it is recording some of the highest COVID rates. Where was Linda Katiba to tell them, hold on, don't hold your elections, COVID is ravaging the country? Please, Tanzania, Ghana, Uganda, Prof, all these countries.
Wainaina asked you, what is the financial impact?
That is what sorry, yes, continue. What is the
financial impact of BBI? He wants to know that. Has your team done that breakdown?
The financial impact, and I think there was also a question about the issues of transfer of powers between levels of government, etc. The financial impact of BBI, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not an authority of this, the Secretariat has the relevant information, is that the costing of BBI processes has been quite limited. Very, very limited, very, very it's quite appropriate regarding the budgetary allocation.
Do you have a range of that limited that you're defining, and what's your range moving forward? Should BBI become law? Are there estimates?
Oh, the costing of the should the amendments be passed, we are going to realize savings which are direct, because the offices, like I gave you examples, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, will be both in the executive and the legislature, and therefore you reduce the cost. Like now, Cabinet Secretary has been earning money, the majority leader is earning a salary, and you are going to reduce that. But the greater reduction in terms of the political economy or the economics of BBI will be better realized through much enhanced accountability of the relevant officers. And I mentioned many of them.
Okay.
Many of the accountability mechanisms which have been built into BBI, checks and balances at executive, legislative, the enhanced role of the Auditor General, enhanced role of the COB, Controller of the Budget, enhanced role of DCI and DPP.
Thank you, Prof. Let's get that final word from Daisy. Someone's asking who's funding Linda Katiba. You can talk to us about that and have your final word on this as well. Our time is fast spent.
Linda Katiba is being funded by Kenyans of goodwill. And we welcome as many people, those who believe in the movement, to contribute as they see fit. And I also want to thank all those Kenyans. We've had overwhelming support since the launch yesterday, and I really want to thank and appreciate Kenyans and call on more Kenyans to be bold and to rise up, to defend the Constitution, to join the Linda Katiba movement, to organize at the grassroots at every level, and let us combine our strength and have a groundswell to defeat this affront to our Constitution and to the sovereign will of the people of Kenya. To Mr. Okango, who continually says that the implementation of the 2/3 is not going to be done through activism, I want to remind him that the first constitutional amendment bill that was proposed in 2011 was proposed by us, the women, and was adopted by the then Minister of Justice, the late Mutula Kilonzo. And we have consistently proposed different number of amendments to the Constitution for the implementation of the 2/3, and that has been rejected. The BBI is now purporting to come up with a solution, which was simply what the Duale bill was, the top-up, lifting special seat members necessary to ensure not more than 2/3. They rejected it at that time. So we know that even them bringing it here is a demonstration that the failure to implement the 2/3 gender principle is as a result of a lack of goodwill. On the financial impact, well, Professor Shihanya talks about the number of cabinet secretaries. He fails to mention that the BBI also provides for deputy ministers, assistant ministers. So like what we have in the CAS is now to be entrenched in the Constitution, who are answerable only to the president. They answer to the president. They are not even subject to the cabinet secretary. So we have an expanded parliament. Remember that BBI is proposing to expand parliament to 360 members of parliament elected. And then the top-up. And so Parliament is now a moving target. The size of Parliament will not be known depending on the top-ups. And we now are adding, making the cabinet ministers come from Parliament. So a lack of checks and balances. So Kenyans need to remember their history, and it's time to dust up the history books and go back to reading where we said we did not want to go, where we had an imperial presidency, where the presidency controlled parliament, where the presidency controlled the judiciary. And that is what is happening. We have already seen it even within the current constitutional order that guarantees checks and balances. A president that refuses to be bound by the rule of law, by the Constitution, frustrating and intimidating the judiciary, controlling the executive controlling the legislature so that they do as they please, and the legislature failing to observe or even hold the executive to account.
Daisy.
As for the economy, I think that we need to take seriously the state of our economy.
Okay.
And as Linda Katiba, even as we do the campaign to defend the Constitution, we will also be speaking to the state of the nation and calling Kenyans to make demands on the leadership class.
Daisy, even as you call for Kenyans to make demands on leadership class, let me place this demand or a question upon you. In the spirit of transparency, any external funding for Linda Katiba?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Thank you, Daisy, for that. And I think that's where we're going to have to leave it. Prof, if I give you a right of response, Daisy will want a right of response.
No.
I hope...
She's raised new issues.
Yes, if you give him a right of response, I must respond.
New issues.
He cannot have the last word because his words have been insults to us.
Prof, you see the quagmire, the dilemma that I'm now in. Briefly, Prof, 30 seconds to
30
be
seconds.
honest.
Let us read BBI instruments, constitution, administrative, legislative, and policy instruments holistically, not selectively. The greatest legacy that President Kenyatta, Prime Minister Raila Odinga can give to Kenyans is a new constitutional order through the proposed BBI constitutional amendments.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof, for that. Daisy, I think...
Wahiga, if he's asking Kenyans to read the BBI, they must make the BBI available to Kenyans. It is not readily available to Kenyans.
Okay.
And I want to say this to Kenyans. Do not be deceived. There is no constitutional moments. Kenyans lose absolutely nothing in rejecting the BBI because we retain a very good constitution.
That is where we wrap this up. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Daisy. We're going to down-sound your mics if we do not finish this discussion. Thank you so much. We've had Daisy Amdani with the Linda Katiba Initiative. She wears another hat, but for this particular discussion, she was representing the Linda Katiba Initiative. They launched yesterday and are calling for Kenyans to support them. We've also had here in studio with us Professor Ben Sihanya with the BBI Committee of Experts. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in and for your feedback. We hope you've learned a bit more about where the country is in, the different perspectives, and it's up to you to make your choice. Thank you so much for your feedback. 2242 has been the SMS line. #Newsnight. More feedback than we can take in, and these are discussions we'll continue to have in this new month and moving forward. My name is Wahiga Mwaura. On behalf of the whole team that's made this broadcast possible, thank you so much for tuning in. Our sign language interpreter has been Joki Shege. Have a good night. Let's keep engaging and, of course, keep it Citizen TV. Good night.